to the Imaginaries.
All right, welcome to another fun-filled and cream-puffed episode of The Imaginaries, where we talk about all things that are imaginary from, as usual, just behind you. Mm-hmm. Today, again, as usual, I am joined by my intrepid co-host.
Intrepid!
But for the first time ever, we are joined by a special third guest co-host. Would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Hi, my name is Parke Cooper. I am also a big reader of science fiction and speculative fiction and so forth, and I also attended the University of Arizona Master of Fine Arts program, along with your two intrepid hosts. And I did recommend this book to the podcast, knowing next to nothing about the podcast, only that it was in great hands. So,
and as it turns out, neither of you two actually listen to podcasts. So
nope,
that's a fun fact.
Not terribly often.
No.
So welcome, Parke.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I hear you have some history with this book.
Yeah. Well, with the author, I guess specifically, Jaroslav and I were both in the same undergraduate writing program at the University of Central Florida a while back, clearly. And we studied under a lot of the same professors and so forth, and we were kind of just, acquaintances, and we would run into each other occasionally at readings and so forth in Orlando and the Central Florida region. But yeah, it's, I would not, let me make this amply clear, I would not have recommended this book unless I loved it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just like, hey, I know this guy and I'm going to try to get the word out about his work.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, because I honestly enjoyed this immensely. So I felt like it would be a cosmic mistake to not try to find out about it, after I'd read it.
Bad.
Yeah.
I guess that was kind of a bad one, wasn't it?
So I'm curious,
Yeah.
Where do people do readings in Orlando? I spent 3 summers there, and I never once successfully found a reading.
A lot of them were, associated with the university, so they would be on campus,
Sure.
or they would in downtown Orlando. There were several places, but there was a little printing press / kind of area where they would hold readings, and that I don't know if it's even still open. I mean, Burrow Press, which is kind of like a homegrown kind of Orlando press, I have very briefly interned there, and it was operating out of that space. So, and they published a lot of great stuff in the intervening years. So, give them a check out.
Link in our show notes.
Yeah.
You said Burrow Press,
Burrow
Press.
Press.
Like a wheelbarrow?
Yes.
Or?
Like somewhere where I guess a burrowing owl or something would
Yes.
abscond.
I like it.
Yeah.
Very nesty feeling.
Yes. So,
That's cool.
Yeah. So Jaroslav, cheers to you. I think for a first, if you're listening, maybe you won't, but I feel like for a first novel, this is just an ass kicker.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah,
so
yes.
So old. Yeah. So that's my history with the book.
That is, I'm actually kind of shocked, but also deeply happy that you know him, because I don't know, that's just so cool. Because this was a book that, again, I had not heard of, had no idea that this book even existed, and then you were just let's read it. And I was like, all right, why not? So, and just, that it's
Yeah, it's a book deserving of a lot of love, and I knew it was a debut, but there is something different about a debut that you have some sort of personal connection to. I mean, our connection is secondary through you, but still, knowing that this is a real person who was studying at the same time as us.
Right.
maybe at a different location.
Is, English is his second language.
Which is just amazing.
Yeah, everything. I feel like this is like a small miracle, So
yes.
It's a small miracle.
I wanted to talk about it. Well, I mean, it's a book dealing about large miracles, right? So maybe.
And some really weird shit too. We'll get into that.
Yeah. So just to recap, for less than 90 seconds is what I'm going to go for. I just looked at the time. So we're looking at the book Spaceman of Bohemia, which came out this year, 2017. So I forget when exactly. I don't think it's been... it's not the last couple of months, but definitely...
Yeah, it was early 2017.
Yeah.
It was February or March, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. So it came out...
Look it up in the book.
But I looked, but it only says the year, at least in my copy.
Yeah.
Rude, Little and Brown.
Yeah,
So
right?
rude. Luckily, this is a first edition, so if I ever stole it from the library, I'd be worth something someday.
Someday, look what I have. It is from the library.
March.
Yes.
March.
Okay, so March 2017. It is the story, very broadly speaking, of a spaceman from Bohemia, shocker, who goes on a solo mission to this bizarre space cloud in the direction of Venus, finds along the way this alien spider who I told Kendra reminds me of the soot balls from the Spirited Away movie, which is just what I saw the entire time that he was on screen, not on screen, in the book and speaking. But it also goes back in time and looks at the main character's life growing up, and then we also flip forward to Earth once he gets back. Spoiler, he does get back, and then we follow him for a while beyond the outer space shenanigans. So, very briefly, that's what goes on in this book, and now let us pull it apart in every possible way that we can.
Every single one. I'm going to actually rip my book to shreds.
Please don't do that.
I have some paper here.
That, if it makes you happy and you would like to rip paper while
someone
you're
else's
bored,
mail.
go for
Don't
it.
want to do that.
No. So,
I got someone else's mail.
So what seems like
It's a felony.
the most... Well, on this podcast, Kendra commits a felony.
Right.
All right, so what about this book seems like the most important thing to talk about? Because I have an idea, but I'm curious. Okay. All right.
Well, let's talk about the absurdist, I would say.
Yeah.
The absurdist elements of this.
Yes. Let's.
Or we can pause.
Okay, so in lieu of a pause, I was immediately reminded of the giant cat from The Master and Margarita. It's it's constantly kind of like, hey guys, what's going on? Like, nothing to see here, just a giant spider. But which kind of reminded me of the martini sipping, pistol slinging cat of Russian, I guess, fable now. I don't know what you would even want to call that at this point.
It's not that old, The Master and the Margarita.
No,
in
it's
terms
not.
of Russian history, it's relatively recent.
Yeah.
Have you read Master and the Margarita, Tony?
No, I haven't.
All right, and it is a relatively recent instant classic of Russian literature. I want to say it was written behind the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say, Parke?
Yes.
And it has, I think there is this trend, we actually have this also in our show notes to discuss today, that there is a deep connection between the absurdist and Cold War Soviet era literature.
Yeah.
Like the Strugatsky's Roadside Picnic has some elements of that as well. So, yeah. Okay, so keep talking about Master and Margarita.
Well, I mean, kind of like the way that the cat sort of insinuates itself into every situation, even when it's kind of not there. Like, once it's introduced, it kind of, you're like, okay, like, what about the cat, though? Like, you're kind of expecting it to keep coming back.
Yeah.
And I felt it's sort of the I mean, clearly, Master and Margarita is like this. In terms of absurdity, it's a 10 out of 10. The book begins with the dude's head like sailing off and rolling in front of the character's feet. And he's like, "No big deal. Welcome to Russia." And Spaceman also, very early on, we're introduced to this character of the spider, although we don't really meet it initially. He's just kind of like, I think I'm hallucinating. This isn't cool, guys. Like, why did I have to come up here alone?
Yeah.
And, throughout the rest of the book, you're kind of going like, oh, God, like, when is he going to be, like, attacked? When is he going to be... Right, when is the spider coming? And I feel like that's kind of representative, maybe, of that sense of that one might get living under, an authoritarian regime. And I feel like that kind of thread of the giant animal, or like the unknowable cosmic horror, lurking, is kind of common throughout work from kind of that region, just because, like, the state was it's portrayed as an octopus in propaganda posters for a reason. It's sort of all encompassing, and you're always afraid, like, who's going to kick my door in and kill me for reasons that are supposedly legal. And so, like, that, I don't know where I'm really going with this now, but please somebody take over.
I was
thinking three-way conversations are hard. I was just going to jump in and say that there are a lot of intimacies to the intrusions as well. Yeah. And you see this a lot in Russian Cold War era literature, where, yes, there's the big brother who is the violent, evil regime that's going to knock your door down, but there's also the multitude of small surveillances that the state took over its people, or used in order to keep an eye on its people. And often the Russian people's feelings about these surveillances were somewhat ambiguous. They weren't always like, oh no, I'm afraid of the government. It was also like, oh, the government's watching me peel my potatoes again. Well, that's just absurd. So, like, you see this tension between, yes, there's a legitimate element of fear that runs through it, but there's also there's the absurdity of having a massive police state monitoring your every move, whether that move is significant or insignificant. So that was all I was going to add.
Yeah.
Little absurdities, like micro absurdities. Totally. I was actually thinking of Solaris, because the relationship between Jacob and the spider, whose name's pronunciation I did look up, Hanush. Hanush.
That's great.
But I was getting a lot of the same relationship that you see in Solaris, the main relationship between... it's been a long time since I read it, and I have the George Clooney stuck in my head. So George Clooney and his deceased wife, who, is reconstituted by Solaris, which was kind of what prepped me for that, because that was my experience with off-the-wall, kind of absurd Eastern European science fiction that I went to immediately. But, like, knowing that, that added detail of the state and observation, like, that is something I've never thought of for Solaris, but is going on everywhere. Like, you have this massively alien, unknowable intelligence that is like monitoring your every move, and not only monitoring, but like creating things to interact with you, to communicate with you. And I think that it's an awesome work of science fiction, Solaris. But I hadn't even thought of the cultural context for what was going on there, and so adding that into the connection between Spaceman and Solaris, I think really adds a lot, because I haven't been exposed to a lot of Russian or Eastern European writing in general, and science fiction in particular.
And you didn't like Roadside Picnic. So
I couldn't really get into it, and I think the problem was that I was reading it too slowly. The same way that I will admit that when I first started Ancillary Justice, I really hated it, and then I came back to it later and read it more quickly, and I was like, this book is amazing, how did I hate it in the first place? So... Sure.
Well, okay, but back to Spaceman of Bohemia.
Yes.
What's really fascinating about the relationship between the main character and Hanush and the main character and the government is that you have multiple layers of this surveillance, right? You have the actual government surveilling him through the cameras and the other recording devices on the spaceship, and then you have Hanush, who is sort of a symbol for the government as well, also surveilling him. So you have the literal government and you have the metaphorical government and all the other things that Hanush is, which he is more than just a stand-in for government, and I feel like we should dig into that a little bit.
Clearly.
Yeah, and okay, so this actually will, I think, help us to orbit around one of the big questions that I want to talk about regarding this book, which is, what the hell is this? And I mean that in, like, anyone who listens to this podcast will know that I am in love with categories. Like, it's kind of my jam. So I'm, really trying to figure out, like, is this playing more on the side of literary fiction, or is this playing more on the side of science fiction? And at the same time, I'm really interested in categories. I also want to break them down. And one of the things that I think about this book and that I want to get to is that I don't really think it's either, but I think it's more on one side, and that's a good thing. But I wanted to start, or I wanted to link that via Hanush and the relationship that he has with Jacob, because, again, in our show notes, one of the really interesting things that Kendra said was that even though it's kind of a science fictional relationship, it's not playing on science fiction tropes. Like, you don't really see, you don't hit the same beats that you would expect in sort of a First Contact alien scenario, which I thought was really interesting. So maybe we could start there.
Yeah, what was your reaction, Parke, when you started reading this book and when you first realized that this is not The Martian or... regular blockbuster space fare. What was your encounter?
I was immediately reminded of somebody like, say, I don't know, Haruki Murakami, who kind of like sometimes has genre trappings, like Cardboard Wonderland at the End of the World, or one of those more genre-y ones, 1Q84 maybe, and then suddenly you're like, well, I guess it doesn't really matter anymore. Like, the characters are what matters, and like what the fuck they're going through and trying to figure out. Like that's they wouldn't be in the situation without the government or technology or what have you, the trapping, right, that brought them to this point, but. Now they've got to cope, and how does that work? And I honestly, the thing that I appreciated most about that first encounter with Hanush was that there's no like, if you've seen Arrival, the whole book is about or the whole movie. I haven't read it yet. I must admit.
The short story is amazing.
Yes. Okay, well, I'll have to read that as soon as I hang up here. But I find it
now. It is
right now. Right. I kind of was glad that we got to jump over the kind of like linguistic and communication barriers and kind of went straight into this, unknowable, otherworldly, other galactic intelligences sort of questions about like our philosophy and like why do humans do these things? Like he analyzed Earth for like 10 years or something before discovering Jacob aboard Janus 1 or whatever the ship is called, and he still has all these questions for him. I was just like elated almost, like being free of the idea of like this hard sci-fi kind of commitment to the rigmarole of encountering an alien. What really kind of like, and I was also kind of glad that Jacob, whatever, his operation of the spacecraft was kind of like also kind of put on a back burner. Like most of it's automated. Right. It's very modern.
The spaceship makes no sense to me at all.
It's goofy, but I love that about it, and I love how he kind of like calls back to the sponsors and like how all this stuff is breaking down. It doesn't work, but he still has to like mention it. It's hilarious. Anyway, I was happy to see that we could just kind of get on with the non-minutia, I guess. Yeah. What did you think about that?
Oh, I love minutia. What I just finished is basically all the things that you said that you're glad it skipped. So,
well, no, there's a place for that. I definitely love that kind of stuff too.
I think part of it is what you're ready for in the moment, and a lot of the conversations we've had on this podcast have been, well, I received this book at the time when I needed to receive it, and therefore it was amazing. So we don't tend to hate on most sci-fi. In fact, if we do hate on something like dystopias, we usually come around to seeing some sort of value to it eventually. So that was my experience with this book. I was deeply uncomfortable with it probably the first 100 or so pages, and then I kind of was like, well, if it doesn't matter, if I know I don't like it, then I can just relax into reading it and get it done. And we ended up finding some things that I really, really enjoyed about it.
Good.
So yeah, I think it's a tough book for me to place, as Tony was saying, in terms of categorization, and that does make me feel somewhat adrift when I'm first trying to figure out, do I even like this? Because we often use categories as our first judge of first criteria for judging whether we are going to enjoy something or whether we do enjoy something.
Right. That's the icebreaker. I get it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and this is like the opposite of quote unquote hard sci-fi, which we have more or less decided to get rid of as a term on this podcast.
Yes, we have.
There's a back episode where we're like, what is hard sci-fi? And we basically come down to the understanding that describing something as hard sci-fi is how marketers and booksellers are trying to label certain books as better sci-fi than this other sci-fi. If it's hard sci-fi, then it's better sci-fi.
Right.
Which is frustrating. So then we had a podcast about like social science fiction, and is it hard, quote unquote, hard science fiction if it adheres to the principles of social science fiction, like anthropology or linguistics, like Arrival, but dispenses with some of the other things that we associate with hard sci-fi.
Right.
So this it's a super weird book. I enjoyed it. I have no idea how to talk about like plot details.
Well, so I was just thinking about this. So one of the other things that we tend to bring up a lot on the podcast is the concept of the novum, which we pulled from Istvan Cicciarone's The Seven Beauties of Science Fiction. He says one of the beauties of science fiction is this concept of the novum, which is the central new concept or new concepts that any work of science fiction explores, and that's one of the things that makes a work science fiction. And so I would, using that criterion, I would say maybe this isn't a work of science fiction, because the things that seem new, the things that might be novums, Hanush himself or the Cloud, aren't really explored. Even the Bohemian space program could potentially be a novum, or the sociological forward strides that have been brought to Bohemia as like a forthcoming world power or something. Like all of those could be novums in a work of science fiction, but they're not developed in that way. And so that makes me think maybe not so much. And it's interesting because my library definitely has the little atomic symbol and the science fiction right on the spine there. And I'm thinking if I was, say, someone who just goes to the library, goes to the science fiction section, sees what's new, sees what has that sticker, pulls it out, I'm trying to decide now if someone like that would be turned off by a book like this, or would be, exposed to something that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise find, and in a pleasurable way. And I think that's maybe... I think
they would if it was categorized the way that my copy is, which mine is straight up fiction. It is not categorized as science fiction. Yeah. And this is not from our library in Polson. This is actually from one of our partner libraries elsewhere in Montana. So, I think that it does transgress a lot of genre boundaries in a... Sorry, I have a car accelerating out the window. I'll let you move along. I think it transgresses a lot of genre boundaries in a really pleasurable way and in a really productive way, because it spurs these exact kinds of conversations, which we love. So
Yes. Because, all right, so here is another reason why I wanted to think about this specifically. So let's look at this in two different ways. One way, this is a book of science fiction that is really focused on character and, maybe even go for like science fantasy, which is it's kind of not really a genre that I love. It basically like does science fictional things but doesn't need to explain them in any way. On the other hand, like maybe this is a book of literary fiction that is dealing really intensely with what kind of shit do you get into in, kind of a progressive tech society in which you are sending people to other planets? And what does that look like if you're actually thinking about those implications in a way that isn't so far off of what could happen right now? And the way that I was thinking about this is that I remember when the world was obsessed with magical realism. And everything was magical realism. And that, I don't think that's changed. I think we definitely have less magical realism now. Like, it's not something that gets bandied around so much. But I remember that was really frustrating for me because it seemed, again, like our conversation about hard science fiction, that magical realism was a way to sort of say, well, we can kind of have magic, but fantasy, that's not really, like, serious literature. So we can sort of do, like, literary fiction with a little bit of magic and call that magical realism, and that's better. And I could very much see Spaceman being the same thing, but for science fiction. Like, we're going to go to space, we're going to deal with aliens, we're going to have unknown phenomena, like, we're going to go into the future, but we're not really gonna do those things. We're just gonna, like, put them in the background so it doesn't have to be science fiction. We can still say it's just literary fiction. So I don't like that. I will, like, put all my cards on the table. I don't want to go in that direction. I think this book is better than that. And it'll piss me off if marketers, like, that's the direction we go. On the other hand, if I can go back to my theoretical person going to the science fiction section at the library and pulling this off the shelf, I would be really excited if this book and books like it push science fiction to really say, okay, we're going to have aliens, we're going to be in the future, we're going to do all of these things, but we are really, really going to care about character and really dig into, like, what character does. And that's just so cool to me. Like, I would love to see more like that, like, really character-focused science fiction like this. And so if I had to categorize this, I honestly, even without a central novum, would say this is science fiction because I want it to be science fiction, and I want there to be character-focused like this. So...
That's the greatest hot take I've heard in a while.
Yes. Yes.
That was very passionate.
Not ironic.
Yes.
Good hot take. Yeah.
And you're on Twitter like crazy, driving cars into bank vaults.
That's
your hot take.
Yeah. No, that was. I agree with you. Like I feel like this is kind of something that I've been looking for a long time because like sort of my introduction to science fiction when I was younger was stuff like 1984 and Dune, and which are things that I adore still, but. I felt like the more that we got towards, or I should say, the more that I explored other things that were like less focused on like the Robert Heinlein or somebody who's just completely enraptured by like the details of a guy like doing shooting things or like doing equations with an abacus and he thinks that's really interesting, like that kind of stuff. The further we got away from that stuff and more towards like the implications of the universe that they live in and like the things that they have to cope with and like the way that the person changes by having to suffer through that experience, like the more that I began to enjoy science fiction and like because I initially I would read it because I was like, well, this is like what people like me should do. Like I'm kind of this, like nerd who enjoys video games and things. I guess I've got to, pick up this copy of Dune, like, see you later. You know, and but in my defense, you know, the alternatives at the time were things like Jurassic Park and so forth. So I guess
which Tony loves.
Yeah, no, it's not bad. I'm just saying, like, it wasn't what I was into.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and someday we're gonna have to have you back on the podcast to explain Dune to me.
Good luck. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm not. No, I'm the wrong person to ask.
Well, you're exactly the right person because you'll be like, well, you know what?
Yeah.
Fuck it, I don't even know.
I don't know.
I love it. And then
Spice.
you'll explain why you love it, and then
Right.
it'll be good.
Yeah.
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 I mean, a lot of our associations with literature, as we were talking about earlier, it's not necessarily something that you can put your finger on entirely. Like, this is why I like this genre. This is why I like this book or this kind of family of books.
Yes.
If we redirect it back a little bit towards Spaceman of Bohemia, you know, if we were to say that it belongs in the company of other books, did it for you guys prompt like an extra reading list? If you liked Spaceman of Bohemia, you might also enjoy these books, or these are the kind of books that it would keep company with on a shelf. Maybe not for marketing reasons, but for like the spirit of the book and what the book is really trying to do with these deeper human relational
That's
of
a
dynamics.
tough one. Yeah.
And would any of them be science fiction?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes to your first question, because I immediately went to, for example, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, for which I have all of the same questions. And, like, I'm thinking even of, you know, books that are going maybe even a little further afield, like Alif the Unseen by G. Willow Wilson. A lot of things, really anything that's trying to take on, like, critical race theory, say, like, Nnedi Okorafor, Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemisin, like, things that are so firmly placed in the real world in some way or another. You know, maybe like those books, they're using science fiction or fantasy tropes to really feed back on things that are going on, which is why they get called, you know, predictive. They told us what was going to happen here. But, you know, even though in those books the same things aren't operating as what's going on in Spaceman of Bohemia or Station 11, like that same kind of engagement with the real world science fiction, or real representations. I keep throwing around the word real, and I don't know if that's exactly what I want there.
What do you mean by that word?
Can I interject?
Yes, because I don't have a good answer.
the way that the author has kind of interwoven the history of the Czech Republic and its past history with this, you know, the USSR, and the main character's like direct personal history. His father, remember, was a spy and torturer for the ruling thing until 1989 when all of that collapsed. So the Velvet Revolution, correct? So I think that when Tony says real, he means like, okay, there's actual like actionable history that you can like open another book and find it, you know, in the stuff from Spaceman. And I really enjoyed the way that they kind of like would play the stuff from that off of, you know, not just in like the naming conventions of the ship and naming Hanush and so forth from these characters and people from the past of the Czech Republic, but also in like the idea that, okay, well, I mean, he grew up under communism. Like, what else do you want from the guy? Yeah. You can't escape from it, really, you know? So, I mean, was that kind of what you were getting at, Tony?
No, I think that for this book, that is 100% spot on. Like, it's real because it feels real, because we are set very much in a real world in which maybe things that are not so real are happening, but everything that surrounds them, you know, this is the real world in this book. It's not a world in which faster than light travel is possible, or a different universe has slipped so we can control metal or something. Like, you know, this is our world. And I think what I mean, you know, generally, if I'm thinking of all the examples I gave when I was talking about real, is this engagement with the reader on a level that isn't necessarily let's escape into a different place, but rather let's consider where you actually are as you are thinking about this particular work, and therefore, because you're engaging with this work, it's sort of magnifying the way that you're looking at other things. And I would have to, that is an off the top of my head answer. I would have to think more about that, but that seems accurate given the spectrum of books that I suggested.
Yeah, and you definitely recommended books that weren't even on my radar for comparisons. I don't know if any of you guys have read Eden Lepucki's California.
I have not.
No.
It is a sort of post-apocalyptic story in which this young married couple moves away to the woods to get away from how gross society is getting, basically. And then they run afoul of the woman's brother, who is an extremist, religious extremist who started a cult. And so they're trying to survive in this cult. And it's one of those things which is definitely, it's got more in common with those fifth floor walk-up Manhattan struggling marriage literary fiction books than it does with most dystopian fiction. I also thought of Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, which is up for pretty much every award and has actually just this last week won the Arthur C. Clarke Award.
Oh, wow.
And it's another sort of sci-fi book that's really dispensing with sci-fi tropes and going with a completely original storyline that in a lot of libraries, in fact in our library, it is categorized as straight up adult literary fiction. I also thought of Anne Corlett's The Space Between the Stars, which only recently came out, and this is a story which is marketed as a solo person in space, lonely, isolated, but then when you read the book you realize very quickly that it's all about this person's relationships, and she's not alone for a significant portion of the book. She might be alone for about 25 to 40 pages, and then the rest of the book is her and with this love triangle thing going on. Anyway, the actual plot points of these books are so divergent, but this sort of spirit of trying to take science fictional architecture and fitting literary fiction sort of plots in there, or maybe exploding them out. I don't know whether it's taking one silo and shoving it in another silo, or taking a silo and blowing it up. I know I struggle with these books a little bit because there are things that I look to science fiction to provide which these aren't providing. And so when I say I love science fiction, I'm not able to say that as neatly and cleanly with these books. But this, again, not necessarily a bad thing, but it makes it problematic when you run a podcast about
yes.
I totally,
it's science fiction. I don't know.
Right.
So that's where I'm at.
I feel you there. A book that I recently completed, or maybe it actually wasn't too recently, but The Water Knife by Paolo Bacigalupi.
I've absolutely heard. I've seen the cover.
It's. I
have held it in my hand.
Yeah, it is extremely salient view of the American Southwest entering a drought in the next 15 to 50 years or whatever, and how people have to cope with that, living in Phoenix without water and stuff like that. So I was initially drawn to the book because I was hoping to find kind of details about that kind of ecological collapse and how it would affect people. And what the reality of that would be like trying to go out there and find another well because you're gonna die tomorrow if you don't, that kind of thing. And it ended up being kind of a book more about the political ramifications of and states' rights and so forth, which is interesting in another way, but it wasn't at all what I thought I was signing up for. And instead, I got this kind of noirish tale of this guy, the Water Knife, trying to figure out who has the ultimate land rights to this water, which everyone has forgotten about, And it ended up being a whole lot of shooting and stuff, which is fine if it's the right place.
Your Robert Heinlein.
Right. But no, I mean, I enjoyed the book, but it was like you were saying. I feel slightly misled. It almost wasn't enough. It wasn't hard enough, even though I know you guys just said, please let's avoid the hard sci-fi thing.
Sure.
It turned into kind of more this is a potential future. Here's how these people are dealing with it. By the way, he's a mass murderer. Okay. That kind of thing. So I agree that maybe Spaceman then would also fall into that space, because it's like, where's the space stuff? And personally, I was kind of satisfied with it, and I was also kind of perplexed, like I'm sure you are, when in the last third of the book it's kind of like that's almost fallen by the wayside. And but I mean, clearly he's
literally on planet Earth, like, trying to get back with his wife and doing this weird surveillance thing on her. At the same time, like maybe a month prior, he had just been shot through a proton field or something. I'm still
right.
I'm not completely and murdered a bunch of Russian astronauts.
Right. Oh, let's not forget that.
Totally just becomes a crazy person. But, like, that, would he have done that if he weren't in space? To me, that's why this book still earns its key to science fiction, because, like, clearly he was completely altered body and soul by what he had to experience.
The science fictional experiment allows him to take this character to the extreme, for sure.
Yeah. Right, and I actually,
which is cool.
Like, thinking about our social science fiction podcast, I'm now wondering if this kind of work that is so focused on character could in fact be said to have a novum in the character himself, or like in a character, that it focuses really specifically on who we see a lot of, in the same way that, like, modern social science really focuses on small groups and not large groups, and really tries to get at the individual stuff that's going on and not make big abstractions to those large groups, but rather, like, which of these social theories can we sort of think about as in play that's, affecting this person, and what power relations are they navigating, and things like that. So I wonder, going all the way back to talking about the state and its influences on Russian and Eastern European literature, if maybe we couldn't think of, the individual character work of this book as kind of its novum, and therefore it is science fiction, just on kind of a different scale than what we're used to seeing.
Sure. I mean, he's the only human in history who will have experienced what he's experienced.
Right.
And what's more sci-fi than that, I guess.
Well, he would have been if he hadn't murdered those Russian
but remember, he was the only one who passed through the cloud.
And survived.
And survived, right.
Yeah.
So whatever that means.
And that just gives me a hang-up right there. We'll get back to talking about my hang-up on murdering the one woman. Okay, so let's just go at that.
Let's do it.
Like the weirdness of gender in this book.
There's some happening.
There is something happening, and I'm not sure quite what it is, but I'm deeply uncomfortable with the portrayal of gender. And in these books, you have two female characters that play any role at all. One gets murdered after she goes like cold shoulder, sort of crazy psycho on him, and then the other one is cold and distant, or has become cold and distant, and the book is obsessed with chronicling that change in her. And the ultimate conclusion seems to be, well, she's better off without me, she's happier without me, which is a very kind of defeatist conclusion to this relationship. But at the same time, it's all about the main character's mindset about her. Like, it's not actually about her, it's about the guy's objectification of her the whole way through. And even his final conclusion is, well, she's better off without me, and she is an admirable person because she is so cold and distant to me right now. Which I found like really weird. And also like really, I don't know, I felt hurt by it. I felt hurt by how limited the conversation on gender was as compared to everything else that was happening that was so beautiful. Conversations about philosophy and religion and the meaning of human existence. And it felt like the book was trying to get at something to do with gender. There's a lot of body fixation going on. The spider, Hanush, and his interrogation of the main character, it's not just of the mind, it's also of the body, and there's a lot of that language in the book. So I'm not sure if there was just like a dotted line that wasn't completed in terms of the development of this relationship in the book and what it was meant to contain, or whether he was just wrong about women. So I'd like to hear you guys, as guys, talk about this a little bit. It felt like a very male book to me, so have at it, male.
Have at it, men folk.
Do you want to begin, or shall
I have a couple thoughts. It's interesting that you say that, because normally that really takes me out of the book. Like, if there's that much gender disparity, if there's that much like orientation disparity, if there's really just not a lot going on in terms of the things that we tend to think about as we talk about on the podcast. And I noticed it in this, and I thought, I remember having these thoughts when he's on the ship communicating with Earth, and I was like, really, could we not just throw in like one woman in the control room? Like, would it be impossible to make Peter a woman? It felt like there could be a really easy fix for that, but in a lot of ways, it felt reductionist kind of all around. Not reductionist, that's not the word I'm going for, but there was a lot of like backpedaling in terms of like both science fiction and literary fiction, I think. I know science fiction better, but they've done a lot of work in terms of making sure that there is representation, and we've talked a lot about this. And so to find a work that has kind of, an almost 60s view of relationships between men and women in the tech industry. I'm thinking,
which, it's fine if you interrogate it.
Yeah, right. If it was kind of
the problem with Game of Thrones isn't that it portrays systematic rape and abuse, it's that it doesn't interrogate it.
Right. And in this way, it could totally be a really interesting look into, here is a nation that's launching a space program for the first time, dealing with all of this like baggage from the Cold War and all of the shit that Europe has been through, and it's trying to keep up with these other world powers, and oh my god, what do we do? Like, who are we actually putting in those positions? Like, what do we care about representation? And that is something that it could have done but didn't. I want to make excuses for it and say, well, we were so behind the main character, and if we had only, ducked out a little bit from behind him and maybe looked at it more, maybe he didn't care about it. But that is such a bullshit excuse, and I hate that excuse.
He totally cares about it.
Yeah, he totally does.
Like, it's coded in that he does care about it, but then it's never followed through on. Like, the whole conversation about the Russian female astronaut as she comes on, like, she's there for a reason. She's female for a reason, and then she gets murdered.
Yeah.
So, I have some issues with that. Yeah, but I see where you're coming from, Tony. What were you going to say, Parke?
Yeah.
The part of the book that really, like, tripped off my, sense on this was the whole conversation between Hanish and Jacob about why this potential pregnancy is so important that they have. And it was kind of like, this is all happening outside of Lenka, his wife's, even jurisdiction, consciousness.
Her body.
Right, yeah. And how, like, to him it was important, and he thought that it was important to her. And, like, I don't remember the exact stuff that Hanish the Spider gets into, but I believe that his conclusion was, like, well, you think that this is important so that you don't disappear, right? So that you have some kind of history beyond your own life or whatever, which is troubling, right? And I mean, and of course that's it's coming from this other dimensional or whatever consciousness, so it's very raw. But is that enough? Like, I don't know what really was being aimed at there. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, does the author, does the book agree that Jacob is a jackass about this?
That's a good question.
I think that like, when the book has Hannes in it, in those scenes, it does agree.
Yeah.
Because Hannes is there to call him out on it.
Mm-hmm.
When it's simply Jacob and his psychoses,
Mm-hmm.
and because, I mean, for all we know, Hannes is a hallucination. It's never even purely confirmed to us that, yes, he's real. When it's just Jacob and his mind and his thoughts, like, we are kind of left adrift in that regard.
Yeah.
And I think that might be, like, for me, the one major doorstop kind of tripping of this book. I agree. It's kind of like wow, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You missed an opportunity there.
On so many other things, he does such a great job of being like, here's this weird thing. I'm going to take a close look at it, then I'm going to take a couple oblique looks at it, and then I'm going to, use some absurdist moment to really highlight, how what my actual perspective as an author is on this subject. And it felt, as you said, it felt like a missed opportunity, and it was enough of a downer for me to kind of, as Tony was saying, be pulled out of the text repeatedly in these moments where I was like, oh, that would have been a great opportunity. And no.
Yes.
It wasn't enough for me to hate the book.
No, right.
by any means. Because it was clear he wanted to take a stab at it, which is a cool thing.
Yeah.
But it just, man, I can't wait for his second book. And I hope that you see more maturation in like the gracefulness of talking about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree. Just the whole situation with him coming back and like his whole kind of like reason to live at that point is like I've got to figure out like what happened in my marriage.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes this whole driving force to the point that he's like, oh, if I go to Russian space prison, like I'm not going to be able to figure out whatever happened with Lenka, so I just have to kill these 4 cosmonauts or these 3 cosmonauts or whoever many. To me, it is the surefire blinking red alarm light for this is a diseased mind, right? And I mean, he's probably an unreliable narrator and so forth. So, I could accept that, I guess, in the moment. But when I was looking back on the book, I was like, wow, what the hell? Like, this is. Like, I know that we need to keep the through line of the narrative going, and there's a lot more we still need to find out and stuff. But like, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for words thinking about it even.
Yeah. Well, we can stop thinking about it. Actually, we don't want to get too much of a rut on that subject.
Yeah.
Tony, do we have any questions that we haven't answered yet?
I think we've hit pretty much everything. I've hit pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. I'm ready to move on to the wrap-up, unless there's anything that you guys want to really...
I'm going to leave that in Parke's court, since he's the one who brought this book to our attention. Well, perhaps as a kind of conclusion, why don't we talk about what really captured you so much about this book that you're like, these people need to talk about it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there were a couple of reasons. The main one was that I was extremely impressed by, and I still am, impressed by the way that, I think I may have already touched on this, that the book weaves the kind of like history of the Czech Republic and dating back a long time, like not even just to the Cold War, but even further back, into a story about just this poor son of a bitch who gets shot into space kind of beyond his control. And I really was, because I mean, I hadn't really seen a lot of that before. Like, we get alternate history all the time, in science fiction. We get alternate reality, like what if one thing was different. But I, maybe I'm speaking from a place of ignorance here, but I really just thought that the specific setup of, okay, the Czech Republic, the one place you probably wouldn't expect to send somebody into space.
Right. Yes.
Here they go. And it wasn't just like this kind of boilerplate, like they went to space and things were rough because everything that happens in space sucks. It managed to transcend itself in this kind of way of like, I felt like this book couldn't exist if it were about the Italians sending somebody to space.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say anything bad about the Italians. I just
that
mean
would be
like
a different book.
Yeah,
Because they
that would
already
be a
are
different-
in space, by the way.
They are, right. I just want to... Yeah, but...
Some of my favorite astronauts are Italian. Sorry, Sam Cristoforetti.
I can't. Stop.
You're real.
Stop.
Continue.
So yeah, I guess it was the particular combination of the historic and the imaginative and the kind of like the unreal and the absurd and everything that kind of mixed together into a sort of thing that I felt was really special. And it also I there was nobody else that had read it, and I just kind of wanted somebody to talk to about it.
Yeah.
Which, that's very selfish, but
You didn't want to be alone. That's a very human instinct.
Yeah,
In fact,
totally.
that's what the book's about.
Yeah.
Exactly what the
Yep.
book is about. Yeah, so it's a microcosm for the day. So I mean, those are the two main points. I also just really was curious if you guys had any insight into whether you think Hanish is a hallucination or if he's factually, corporeal.
This is an Inception moment. I think it's the spinning top. I think that's not the point, right?
Right. It's totally not the point. Yeah. It's the question though that you also have to ask, right? And you can walk out of Inception going, well, did it stop or not? And that's
right.
Is the spider there or isn't he?
Right.
Did he eat the Nutella or what?
Oh, the Nutella. That's a good thing. I liked that.
Yeah.
Some of the specifics of the book were really, like the details felt really rich and lived in, which was really a nice change from sci-fi. My takeaway would be that I really appreciated that it wasn't a Heinlein where we're getting maybe specific details about the magazine on this particular rifle, and that's about it. Like, we don't have insight into the daily lives and what it feels like to live in these minds and in these universes. Whereas with Spaceman of Bohemia and some of the other books that we've talked about that share some of its DNA, it's all about the lived daily experience of being human. And that is something that I think we can definitely appreciate and look to see more of in sci-fi. Clearly, if the Underground Railroad is winning all of these awards, we will see more of it.
I agree.
Yeah. As for if Hanush was real, I'm going to go back even further than Inception to Contact. Same question as Ellie's dad. Like, was he real? Was he actually her dad? Well, he was not actually her dad, but he was real, and I think Hanush was too.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point is that the experience was real to her, and then there were those 17 minutes of static.
Yes.
Static, right.
Yes.
Whereas in this book, we don't really get the confirmation of the static. And I honestly don't remember whether in the book Contact, whether there's that extra confirmation that there is at least an indication for other people than her.
Well, you never...
Her experience was real.
You never... Because in the book Contact, they have a group of 5 that goes out, so they all kind of, like, support each other because they all see different people and they all have different experiences, but they've all gone there and they've all come back. And there was, like, it was very, like, Carl Sagan-ish, like, this was like, we're looking at best case scenario. They learn a lot more than they learned in the movie. So, but I actually appreciate the way that the movie did it over the book for the reason that she has to, become a doubter. But this is not about Contact, much as I wish it was.
This is about Spaceman of Bohemia, which is a great book, and you should totally read it if you listen to our podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, I would say, and I know we're only about halfway through 2017, but I would definitely give this, put this in my top 5 books of the year so far, for sure.
Great.
I'm going to wait until October to decide because there's a lot of really great books coming out, which we will talk about on the podcast. We've got the third and I think final book in the Broken Earth series from N.K. Jemisin.
Yes.
We've got the third book in the Binti series from Nnedi Okorafor.
Yes.
There are so many good books coming out from Tor and Orbit, specifically in sci-fi imprint this fall, that I'm going to hesitate to put out a top 5 list. I would say that this definitely makes the top 10. But leaving some wiggle room for these other books to come.
Right. For sure. And at the end of the year, we'll do a top podcast of like what were the best books of the year for us. So.
Yeah. And you're welcome back for that, Parke. You could just
yes.
say,
Hey, what's up? It's me. Here with my one recommendation, and I'm going to bounce.
Well, you're cool. I think our listeners would love to have you back.
For sure.
So.
Yes. Standing invitation.
Right.
Standing invitation, every Thursday or Wednesday or sometimes Friday or Saturday. We
All right.
Usually once a week at some point.
Well, I didn't realize y'all were producing so frequently. That's great.
Sometimes you have to take sometimes you have to take little breaks because of vacations or grad school or whatever. So that's on the horizon. So Tony, you want to take us out today?
I will. So if you are looking to hear more of us, you can find us on iTunes or on SoundCloud or on YouTube. Each of those places, if you search for The Imaginaries, you will find us. All of our back episodes are on YouTube. Only the latest 6 or so are going to be on iTunes and SoundCloud. You can check out our new website. It's imaginaries.net. And you can always find us on Twitter at imaginary_pod. If you have an idea for a book that we should read or a movie we should watch or something and you want to talk about it, just let us know, because we're totally into that, as we can actually say, because we did it this time.
We did it! And our first guest is a smash hit. So thank you, Parke, so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Kendra and Tony. I appreciate it.
Your recommendation was a really good one.
Yes, it was.
I would not have read this book.
Really?
I hadn't heard all the podcast recommendations about it. I would not have read it if you had not been like, you should read this book.
Okay, well. Putting out that positive karma.
Yep.
All right, so have a great life, people.
Thanks.
All right, peace out.